Good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock, but we still see folks still being uh, entering the waiting room. If you give us just a minute, then we'll get started. But thank you for joining us. All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Margie Tater with GridWorks, joined by my colleagues from GridWorks, Kathy Boyce and Deborah Shields. We are so glad that you are here for this conversation on May 20th, 2026, regarding the Southwestern Public Service Company's 2026 Integrated Resource Plan, or the IRP. Today's workshop is focused on understanding base case model results to date and discussing plans for additional analyses for this process. As you saw from your Zoom screen, we are recording this workshop such that all of you, plus others who couldn't be here, can refer to the recording in the future should you wish to repeat some of the conversation that occurs today. So with that, we're also super glad to have our subject matter experts here from Southwestern Public Service Company. You'll hear more from them here shortly. Our objectives today are really focusing on understanding what's been learned from modeling results to date and preparing for the conversation about what additional analyses are going to be done by the utility and input from stakeholders about any additional analyses that are of interest to stakeholders that are not already on the utilities list. So you'll hear model results to date in the base case and hear plans for SPS's additional modeling analyses. We'll begin the discussion about stakeholder modeling interests. We'll describe the process for submitting stakeholder requested run ideas, and then we'll ask you toward the end of today's workshop whether you as a stakeholder feel that there is a need for additional office hour discussion on any topic before our subsequent workshop in June. So you see the agenda below. We will take a break during the middle of a conversation about base case model results, but we've also allowed plenty of time for questions. We'll summarize and adjourn by noon or earlier if the conversation ends at that point. So again, thank you so much for being here. All right, the next slide you've seen before, but just want to review our workshop norms. Please hold your questions while presentations are going on till we have the Q&A segments launched. When you do state a question or comment, please give your name and organization when offering your question and speak as clearly as you can. We would like to ask if anyone is logged in on Zoom without your full name, please put your full name in. And if you're new to our process, please also add your organization so that we know who all is here. Continue to be respectful in your comments, which has been great. Give each other the benefit of the doubt, share your ideas, and leave time for questions, as is our norm in past workshops. The next slide describes our central question that you've heard before, answering that key question of what is SPS's resource need to meet the expected demand, given all the requirements and considerations that go into that. So the three places where there's stakeholder input are shown in this graphic here. And today we're focused on the modeling effort so that in future workshops, we'll have group conversations about statement of need and action plan. The next slide shows where we are in our process. As we mentioned in our past workshop, we had 3 workshops really setting the stage, building a foundation of knowledge, understanding the SPS system at the big picture level. We are now diving deeply into detailed modeling. These next 3 workshops, today, May 20th, and also in June and July, we'll have more detailed conversation about modeling. And then in August and September, we will go back to a big picture conversation about what do all these results mean? What does the analysis tell us? What insights are gained? And how do those insights inform the statement of need and action plan? So down below the timeline, you can see the notional topics that will be covered in each of the workshops, starting with workshop 4 today and moving through September. So in our effort to jump into detailed modeling discussions, the next slide describes things that happened since our prior workshop, just to keep people informed about follow-up actions that occur. There was a May 11th Texas stakeholder session, which was not technically part of the New Mexico IRP process, but we want to applaud and give a special thanks to SPS for reaching out to their Texas stakeholders with a session in person for people to have questions. And if you have additional information about that session, you can contact Linda Hudgens at this email address. Also on May 12th, we worked with SPS to host an office hour for any follow-up questions from Workshop 3. Those materials, the recording, and a few slides are available on the GridWorks website. And at that point, we had no open items that remained after that office hour session. So we're good to go into new material and conversation today. With that, let me just stop for a moment and let you know that we are now about to go into SPS's presentation of their modeling framework, the modeling tree, which you've all seen before. But we wanted to show you this next slide before they do that. This next slide is really what we heard from stakeholders in Workshop 2 about what your interests are in this process. And so after Justin's presentation about some of the modeling tree conversation and the analysis that is planned, we're going to ask you a question. We're going to ask, does the modeling framework capture your priority interests? And so you might recall this list of priority interests. The percentage on the right indicates the number of people who responded to our poll who indicated that that was their interest. And you see at the top of the list, industrial electrification, with 60% of the respondents saying that's something they were interested in. So we wanted to refresh that in your memories. Of course, you may have had new interests come up as you've learned more over the past 3 workshops. But again, we'll be asking you for your ideas and your interests if they're not represented in what framework is described here shortly. So with that, let me turn the presentation over to SPS. We will now go into some slides. We will be launching a poll, a 1-question poll through Zoom, and we want to strongly encourage everyone to respond. We may have some quiet time while we're waiting for you to do that, because that is the jumping off point for our discussion. So with that, Justin, let me turn it over to you. Welcome back, and please continue with your conversation.
All right, I'll wait for the presentation to get pulled up there. Thanks so much, Linda. All right, glad to be back here with everybody. Thank you for all of the conversations that we've had thus far, and I'm excited to get to show you some of the base case modeling work we've developed so far. There's still a lot of work left to be done, a lot of modeling runs that are still going, and anticipations for future modeling runs. So we can go to the next slide real quick, Linda. So just an important note here, all the modeling results, we're working very diligently to get the modeling completed. We're working right up to the actual time that we're doing the presentation actually today. So all of this modeling work that we're showing here is really preliminary. We just need to make sure that we understand that and that things can change over time as we're doing additional QA/QC and making sure that these modeling results are as accurate as possible. So we could potentially be making some adjustments to these models. If we do make those adjustments, we'll obviously be very upfront and communicate those things. But just know that every slide that we're showing here today is really should be characterized as preliminary results. All right. Another just kind of important note too, and we've discussed this a few times, is that the IRP, when we are developing these scenarios with generic resources, these generic resources and their ability to meet SPS's need are perfectly matched. So, for example, our wind and solar and battery resources, they're really these very small incremental units of like around 10 megawatts. And so as the model is building these resources through time, it's just building the exact amount necessary. Now, that means that the IRP model is really representing a perfect shape of resource types to meet the customer need. That can be very different from what we ultimately get selected in RFPs because when we actually go to the real bids, those resources tend to be chunky selections. Instead of incremental increases of 10 megawatts over time for batteries, you get a 500 megawatt battery project or a 50 megawatt project. So we're trying to, Tetris blocks these RFP bids together to ultimately present a portfolio, and that may not necessarily be exactly what is involved in the IRP. We're also limited to the bids that are actually bid into the RFP. So if we ultimately don't receive a technology type that was modeled in the IRP, or it is not at the same volumes, or the timing is not necessarily right, there could be some mismatches. So um, with that note, we'll just move into the presentation, get to the modeling tree. Wanted to provide just a general update about where we are at on the conceptual modeling tree. So today, what we're really talking about is what is in the yellow boxes. So we got the load forecasting section. So our three main base scenarios, the unconstrained planning forecast, that represents the known demand that's unconstrained. So by constrainment, we're talking about SPS's ability to meet that need. So this is just what customers are saying that they need, regardless of our ability to serve it with either transmission constraints or near-term generation resources. That represents our highest case. But ultimately, in the end of the optimization period, that unconstrained planning forecast really ends up at the exact same location as the constrained planning forecast. So it's really a difference in near-term need between the unconstrained planning forecast and the constrained planning forecast. The constrained planning forecast in that near term, we model the expectation, or we modeled in the load forecast the expectation of SPS's ability to relieve those constraints either through transmission or resource additions and things like that. But ultimately, the unconstrained and the constrained end in the same location by the end of the optimization period. But I think that you're going to find it very interesting to see in these slides exactly how that change in SPS's ability to meet the near-term need can really influence resource selection through the optimization period. The last one on the left side is our low forecast, and that represents a conservative demand. It's just a lower forecasted amount. It represents kind of our bottom need that's not necessarily incorporating those actual planning assumptions. SPS believes that the constrained planning is where we are going. That is what we are building all of the sensitivities off of, is the constrained planning forecast. So we'll have a comparison of these three load forecasting scenarios, but really when we start talking about sensitivities after that, we're really talking about sensitivities based upon the constrained planning forecast. Now, as we move to the right, you can see our next group of slides is talking about SPP market interactions. Now, we do have both the islanded and non-islanded approaches developed. The non-islanded approach really represents the exact same thing as what you're seeing on the constrained planning on the left-hand side. It is our standard modeling approach. In addition to that, we are also modeling a scenario where the market does not, or SPS does not have access to the market during the production cost runs. So in the SPP market interaction runs, these are really just production cost runs off of the exact same expansion portfolio. So the same resource selections. The only difference is SPS's ability to draw or sell into the market in these scenarios. We do have those results. They're not fully QA/QC'd at this point, but there are some general things that we can talk about, and once we get to those slides, on what we're seeing as a general trend with those runs. Um, on the Energy Transition Act, this is what we're currently working on developing. We obviously we don't have that information today, but what we are looking to be modeling is two basic scenarios. One that's right, what we call the incremental renewables. And so that takes the SPS system-wide needs and we re-optimize the capacity expansion to to require the RPS requirement for New Mexico's load ratio share. So let's just say 50% of the customer demand in 2030 is Texas and 50% is New Mexico. And in 2030, we know that 50% of New Mexico's load is required to be served with renewable energy credits or energy that has renewable energy credits, so wind and solar resources. So 25% of the entire load is required to meet the RPS requirement. And every resource is also on a load ratio share, or not every resource, but most every resource is based on the load ratio share of that resource's ability to contribute to the requirement. For instance, a project like Sagamore Wind, 522 megawatt wind project, that 522 megawatt wind project, not every credit that is generated associated with every megawatt hour at that unit or those wind turbines goes to New Mexico compliance. It's based upon the load ratio share of Sagamore. So that's what we're talking about in the incremental. And so we move that through time, but it's all built on the system-wide requirement. And the model re-optimizes the entire system to be able to meet that on the incremental renewables. The kind of the interesting thing that we're going to be modeling this incremental renewables is that 2045, because it's on a system-wide basis, what we have is a 100% renewable energy credit requirement at 2045. So there's not a way for us on a system-wide approach that is not locking out Texas to be able to demonstrate a 100% carbon-free requirement in this incremental scenario. So that's when we move to this deconstructed system scenario, where we take that same base build that we have in the constrained planning on the left-hand side, and when we have that portfolio, we look at it and we get the load ratio share of every resource on the system, and then the thermal resources that are selected in that. Let's say we have two CTs coming online in 2030. What we would do in the deconstructed system scenario is take one of those CTs and lock it into the base portfolio. So Texas side of this equation is going to assume its load ratio share of thermals, and then we lock the entire system. And once that system is locked, it assumes that the least cost portfolio for Texas customers is now locked in. And then we add the RPS requirement. So then the model is only re-optimizing to solution out the RPS requirement on the New Mexico load ratio share. And we would only allow renewables and battery technologies in that respin for New Mexico share. The benefit of this is that at 2045, we have the ability to be able to select resources that are carbon free for New Mexico's load ratio share. So it allows us in this deconstructed system to show the least cost portfolio for Texas and also the requirements to get to that carbon free requirement in 2045 for New Mexico. Between these scenarios, by comparing those, we can really demonstrate and show exactly what it means to go from a renewable energy credit requirement through 2044, and then at 2045 go into carbon free. So in this incremental renewables scenario, there's an ability to allow for, there's not an ability, but uh, the renewable energy at 2045, you have enough renewable energy on the system to account for all of New Mexico's load. But in the deconstructed system scenario, you actually are getting to a carbon zero requirement at 2045. So those are the two scenarios that we're working on developing right now. Mullen team is hard at work on developing those right now, and they're doing a fantastic job of getting those built out. So I think it's going to be a really informative way for us to look at how this Energy Transition Act ultimately impacts and relates to the IRP process. Now we go to the far right. We'll have a questionnaire specifically on some of these emerging tech and the data center stuff, so I won't spend too much time on that. But we also have the fuel pricing scenarios, uh, the modeling having been, or the expansion plans having been completed. We're still working through the production cost runs, but I still think that there's some we have added two slides at the end of the presentation to kind of talk about fuel pricing and its ultimate effect on resource selection of the portfolio. So we'll discuss that at a very high level on capacity expansion only, and not necessarily talking about the resulting production cost at this time. So that's generally where we're at. I think we got a lot of good information to talk about today with the yellow boxes. Margie, I see you came on screen. Is there something you needed to discuss?
Yeah, Justin, great. Let's pause here and see if people first have questions about these analyses on the modeling tree before we ask them the poll question about whether or not their interests are served by this set of analyses. So let's go, please, if you have a question about the content of the slide, question or clarification, please raise your hand. I see Chelsea and then Darren. Let's go to Chelsea first and then we'll go to Darren. Chelsea, please give your name and your organization before stating your question.
Thanks, Margie. This is Chelsea Hoteling with Energy Futures Group. I just was hoping I could ask a clarifying question because I think I don't understand now how the islanded scenario is working. So did I hear you say that you're not optimizing the capacity expansion plan around a summer reserve margin and summer ELCC assumption to capture, what the system might look like if you weren't a part of SPP, and that it's only just basically shutting off the SPP market in the production cost runs? Did I understand that correctly, or do I have that wrong?
Maybe state your question. I'm sorry, but can you state your question one more time? I was kind of reading through our section while you're saying that and trying to match up with what you were asking. Just one more time.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I originally thought the SPP market interaction scenario under the islanded condition would be a capacity expansion, assuming no participation in SPP. So I didn't know if you guys were going to do a study to determine a summer planning reserve margin and
Oh,
ELCC assumptions to model. So I was kind of thinking that might be how the islanded scenario was designed, but it sounded like what you just shared was that it's not impacting the capacity expansion. It's just in the production cost run, you're shutting off that SPP interaction. And so I just wanted to make sure I understood how the this islanded scenario is being modeled.
yeah, thank you. So, yes, originally as designed, what we're thinking about doing is just the production cost. So the market's off. When we do the capacity expansion on all runs, the market is turned off. So the idea is that SPS should be building enough resources to be resource adequate on its own in all scenarios. So that's what I'm saying is that when you move to when you talk about the market interaction component, it really is just a production cost run where we don't turn on the markets um, uh, uh, in the island approach, and the markets off, or I'm sorry, the markets on approach is our standard modeling approach. Um, so yes, that's where we're at. But we're more than happy to take some, some feedback in the poll and on the form if you prefer a different perspective on what that island approach should look like.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I was just confused because of the wording about no winter PRM or ELCC,
Yeah, yeah.
because that wouldn't impact the production cost rate. But yeah, no, I'm more than happy to provide feedback on the scenario. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I think honestly, we probably needed that does not align with my expectation on the modeling scenario, what I'm seeing on the screen either. So we can
Okay.
definitely make some clarifications on that. So we'll figure out exactly how we want to model this approach and incorporating your feedback into that, and maybe we can potentially modify what the islanded scenario looks like.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. Let's see, Darren Zigich, I see you had your hand up, but it's down. Darren, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I think Chelsea covered most of my question, but yeah, Justin, I have kind of the same question because if you're truly islanded from the market, then I would assume that the winter PRM requirements and even the ELCC for SPP would go away and you would reset that to some Excel standard. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the question, but you're saying that it doesn't affect the capacity needs of the system.
Yeah, we can definitely review this. My expectation on the SPP PRMs and ELCC is in general our system, our review of the system, our testing of the system, as we've also provided in the last CCN filings, is that these requirements are fairly aligned with what our system needs are. And we see that the system is actually the needs around the winter PRM and ELCC values are in alignment with what SPS would do on its own. But we can do a run, I think that where we remove the winter PRM requirements and then just take the ELCC off. So we're just looking at a summer kind of look. So it would just be a summer PRM requirement. However, what we are seeing and see the value in that winter PRM and the ELCC accreditation is that it really does allow the system to maintain that reliability. What we are seeing is a risk in winter, uh, similar to the winter storm Uri events, where our load um, through time is becoming even flatter than it is today. And then as you get further in time, there's a potential for the winter requirements, I'm sorry, the winter load to be approaching summer load. So you really do need to be considering a winter PRM and the associated ELCC accreditations with that. In particular, I think that looking at a summer perspective only can allow you to, or not can allow you, but could incentivize the model to select resources that have a very seasonal component. And specifically, Chelsea, I see you raise your hand. I think about solar and those types of resources' ability to operate in the winter and potentially add more risk to a system with a high load factor and increasing winter load. So I do think that SPS is generally alignment with the SPP requirements, but I would also say that it is something that we can model of what it would look like to not have a winter PRM or associated ELCCs. Yes, Chelsea?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry to ask another question on this, but I just and if this has been covered in a prior workshop, I also apologize for that. But is your model process to look at any like portfolio verification after you develop the portfolios in Encompass? Like, are you doing any reliability modeling in Servom or Recap or another model like that? And I only ask that because that could be one way to test if you did develop any expansion plans under just a summer construct. Like, you could kind of test how those portfolios react in a reliability model. So I just was wondering if that was part of your model process, or if you're sticking to just Encompass capacity expansion and production cost modeling.
At this time, we were just expecting to be sticking with capacity expansion and Encompass modeling.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks for the good questions. Anybody else have questions about the content of this slide before we launch our one question poll for you to ask if your interests are represented in this suite of analyses? Any other questions? Kathy, are you seeing anything in chat?
I am not. Thank you.
All right, Deb, will you please, you can leave this slide up, Justin and Linda, because I think it's a great framework for people to react to. And so our question now is, as we mentioned before Justin spoke, does this modeling framework capture your priority interests? And we're going to ask for yes or no. Let's see. If you are uncertain about your answer to this, if you don't know yet whether it's a yes or a no, please put into the chat that you don't know and need more information or want more conversation. So I'm sorry, we were intending to have an option that said don't know, but we will allow you to. Uh, we'd like everybody's response to this. So it's either yes, no, or something in the chat that says I'm not sure yet, so that we can have more conversation. And we're going to have a few minutes for folks to respond. I see we have over 20 participants, stakeholders here. So we're going to wait for people to respond to this. We're going to give a little time because this is a very important launching point for our next conversation. We would ask that the SPS and Excel folks refrain from responding to the poll, but all our stakeholders who are here, please enter your response to the poll, either yes or no. Or if you don't know yet whether you stand on this, please put a note into chat indicating you'd like more discussion. It is important for us to hear from you, so please respond if you're a stakeholder. And we will, after the poll closes, we'll ask those who have indicated no or I don't know to share some more thoughts about this topic. As you see, this poll is anonymous, so no need to be bashful about your response. I'm going to give just another few seconds. Please, it's really important that we hear from you about your sense of this modeling framework, whether it captures your interest or not. Okay, I think, Kathy, do you agree? Can we end the poll? All right,
Yep, I
Deb,
think
thank
so.
you. It looks like 12 out of our 13 responses indicated that it does represent your interest. I would like at this point to open the conversation about whoever the folks who indicated no, or perhaps you don't know whether or not it meets your needs, your interests. Let's open up conversation and see if people want to say anything more about this modeling framework, whether you have, maybe it is based on the conversation we already had about the islanding scenario and perhaps some differences in the assumptions for that. But would anybody else like to share their thoughts about this framework, particularly if it does not represent your interests? Please raise your hand if you'd like to offer a comment. And while you're thinking about that, Justin, we'd like to pose one question. As we noted in workshop 2, there were a number of our stakeholders who were interested. In fact, our number 2 response on the priority interest poll was affordability and customer bill impacts. Can you talk a little bit about how the analysis in these categories will be treated and what the conversation about affordability and customer bill impacts are taken into account in these analyses? That's the one thing that's a little hard to see in the slide because it's so. Could you talk a little bit about your approach?
Yes. So the the objective of Encompass is to find the least cost portfolio to meet system-wide needs. So at its base, it is trying to find the least cost solution that helps to limit the impacts to customers and assume some maximum affordability of a portfolio. I would also say that there are some things independent of the modeling that SPS is doing and is moving forward with, such as a large load tariff. It's something that we are actively developing to help protect existing customers from rate impacts. We're also looking at things like microgrids, that could be potentially ways to bring on specific customers at specific locations without necessarily impacting existing customers. So there are a few things that SPS is doing as a general component. In the IRP framework, the least cost optimization is our main tool to be able to ensure affordability of the portfolio as customer needs are progressing in the future.
Great. Thanks, Justin. I don't know if anybody has other questions at this point or interests that you'd like to express in terms of needs for analysis. If not, we'll move to the next part of the presentation. But let's give us just another couple seconds for folks to raise your hand if you want to have more conversation. Or Kathy, did you have key questions that you might want to poll or discuss?
Yeah, thank you, Margie. Justin, similarly, another high interest from this that we saw from this group was the speed and timelines for serving new customers and industrial electrification. So similarly to Margie's question, how in this modeling tree would you address that interest of speed to power and those need for timelines?
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the timelines, there's obviously some recognition today that the SPS system is not able to meet all the customer demand at the time that it's wanting to come on. That's why we have the unconstrained planning forecast. And we're really trying to demonstrate that, what would be built or could be built to meet demand if there was an infinite amount of resources available and no impacts to transmission development. There are a few other things outside of the modeling that we are cognizant of on getting that speed to power. Like I said, the microgrid solution, that is an opportunity that we see as like a bridge product that ultimately gets us to be able to connect customers quicker, and also protecting existing customers from any kind of cost increases associated with that. But we're trying to be as creative as possible with developing these new tariffs to get customers connected quickly. On system-wide resources, we are still beholden to the DICES process. Folks may have heard about HILS, HILGA. Those are some different processes inside of SPP, specifically targeted at large loads, to get them connected quicker. Those are a way to get connected quicker. They do have some specific challenges associated with them. Going through those processes may be able to connect both load and resources quicker. However, there is still a requirement to go through the DICES for those resources to be connected. So you can get connected, but there is an expectation of non-firm service until the network upgrade kits can be developed. So you may be able to connect, but there is a certain assumption of unknown cost to connect or to get firm service, and that will be required within 5 years of actually starting that process. And also an unknown amount of potential curtailment from not being able to service the load with those resources that are being brought on to get them on. So there's just a lot of unknowns associated with that process, but that is a concept that is in place at SPP, and that we're looking to be able to utilize to connect customers faster. And I think that Jared Cooley is on. I mean, he's definitely our resident SPP expert. I don't know if there was anything that he might like to add to that. I think he's on. I might be wrong. I think I'm wrong. I apologize for that.
Margie,
No, Justin,
can you
I
hear me?
am on, but
Okay.
I didn't have anything to add.
Okay, thanks. I think I heard another question too.
Yeah, there's another voice.
So this is James Hall, ExxonMobil. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, James.
Hey, quick question on the whole microgrid concept, and I applaud SPS for looking at sort of innovative ways to get people connected more quickly. How does that work though, from like a rate making perspective, if you're not sort of part of the initial grid? Have you got any kind of just high level commentary on, is this through the regulated utility, or is this through like a separate sort of commercial bilateral type agreement initially? Like, how does that work from a rate based perspective if you're not sort of fully connected?
Yeah, I'm not going to be the expert or the person to be able to talk about that. We can definitely take the question back unless we have an expert on the call that might be able to discuss that, but we might have to take that question back.
Yeah, we'll take that question back. I mean, broadly, James, is going to be an agreement between the participants, and it's going to be SPS will be in the middle of coordinating the generation and those looking to connect to the microgrid. But we'll propose some more detailed comments around that construct for this group.
Right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, James. Appreciate the question.
Margie, before we leave the survey, if I could pull us back around to that, we did see just a handful, a small group that was either that the modeling framework did not reflect their priority interests, or maybe some of you that don't know. I would invite those of you that are in that bucket to come forward here and just share your ideas, your thinking. What else is it that you would like to see? And we are going to take an uncomfortable pause here because, folks, I really want to reiterate this modeling framework is going to be the foundation for the next several months of work. So if you're not comfortable now, please speak up. This is the time to get your thoughts in so that the SPS team can consider modeling needs that you have. Okay, well, we'll leave it there as we get further into the results. As Justin presents some of the remaining material for the day, please put it in the chat. If something occurs to you that you have a question or relates back to this modeling tree, that you see a scenario, please put it in there. That this really is the foundation for the next several weeks of work. Margie, I'll hand it back to you then.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for the conversation. We will now turn the presentation back to SPS because our star of the show for this conversation is really, what do the base case model results begin to look like? And so this may inform your needs for additional modeling requests. So as Kathy mentioned, if things come up while you're hearing Justin talk about results to date that you are interested in further exploration of, don't hesitate to bring them up in our discussion or put them into the chat. So Justin, back to you to continue on with your presentation.
Thank you. Oh, okay, I'm on mute. Thank you for that. All right. Yeah, so first, we've got three main sections of this presentation, and they're really geared around those left boxes. So the constrained planning forecast, the unconstrained, and then the low forecast. Generally, what we'll end up showing is a slide that is specific to the nameplate additions. So no accounting for accredited capacity, just what did the model build on its nameplate values through time, and then we'll look at both the accredited position and the accredited summer position and accredited winter position. I think that some of the conversations between those accredited seasonal views might help inform our conversation about that islanded approach and what actually that winter requirement is really doing for the build. When you see the slides, in general, the darker saturated color is going to represent existing resources on the system today. And as we move to the right, you're going to see less saturated versions of the same color. That represents new generation coming onto the system. So as you see in this first scenario right here, this is our constrained planning forecast. You're going to see a dark red that represents combined cycles today. The lightish pinkish color that represents future expansion of that same type of technology. We've also made sure that every graphic that's on here represents the same y-axis and same x-axis. So it's the same time series for all graphics, and then the total amount of megawatts on the left-hand side is going to always be the same. So you'll be able to apples to apples comparison. You won't have to worry about changing the scales or anything like that between slides. So what we see here, this is our constrained planning forecast. So the red line represents the system peak, and then the darker, almost maroon line is that PRM requirement. So this is just nameplate additions. You should be expecting to be well over the PRM requirement on a nameplate basis. But what you can see is that as the load is expected to increase, we see additional resource selections. But you're going to start seeing that on the left, you're going to see much more saturation color. And then as you go to the right, you're going to see less of the saturation color. That represents retirements and expirations. So retirements of existing resources on SPS owned generation and expirations of PPA agreements. So as we move through time, you can see that there's a significant amount of additions between all technology types. We see new resources for both generic batteries, generic wind, generic solar, generic CTs, and generic combined cycles. One kind of important component here is that yellow and blue kind of area. That really represents SPS's is existing kind of thermal generation. It's firm dispatchable, outside of the batteries. And you can see that we have a solid base of firm dispatchable technologies on the left, and those existing resources diminish over time. And over on the right, you're seeing a relative portion of firm thermal generation supporting the system. It increases over time, but it's increasing in accordance with the PRM and the load forecast. So it is increasing over time, but it's not necessarily an outsized increase. It is just there to supporting the system. So this is our constrained planning forecast. And then let's just jump to the next slide, which represents our summer accredited capacity position. Now, this takes into account the ELCC accreditation and performance-based accreditation for resources for the summer. Just to remind folks, thermal generation at SPP, its accreditation is based on its performance, and it's the historic 7-year performance of resources. So as you go through time, a resource the thermal resource is not getting its full accredited or a full nameplate value for its accreditation. It's actually discounted based upon its historic performance. For renewable technologies and battery storage technologies, we have what we call the effective load carrying capability of resources. So it's a different methodology for calculating the accreditation for those resources. In general, what you can see here, though, is if you were to flip between the nameplate and the accredited capacity resources, that in general, you're getting a much higher density of capacity on an accredited basis versus its nameplate for thermal generation as you do for the other technology types. So yeah, you're going to see quite the difference between nameplate and accredited capacity. Now, one thing to before we move on to the winter accredited capacity position, I think is really important is that you see that the PRM and you see the forecasted system peak demand, and you can see resources being selected over that. That's the amount of resources that are being selected over the summer position because the system is finding a binding constraint in the winter period. So now as we move over to the next one, the winter accredited capacity, you can see that excess amount of resources really kind of dissipates. So on an accredited capacity basis, there's not a huge difference between summer and winter. Summer does get overbuilt slightly because winter becomes the binding constraint, but it is not a large variation, at least on an accredited capacity basis. Now, what resource types you select, though, can have an outsized impact on an overbuild on a specific season. And as you go through time, the ELCC penetration levels of those different technology types can also have an influence. This situation or this kind of dynamic I feel like is most prevalent in the RFP results. When you go to actually select for real resources, you can see a lot of variation between portfolios on nameplate basis because the ratio of resource selection between resource types can have a drastic influence on the winter and summer season nameplate builds or accredited capacity position from the nameplates that are being produced. So that is that capacity expansion that represents SPS's base case scenario, and this represents the energy mix. So on the left-hand side, what we have is a general energy mix. I just picked the year 2040 because I felt like it's fairly a good representative period of time towards the later half of the model of just where SPS is kind of going on an energy mix. So you can see this is the energy mix, and then as we move to the right, we do a waterfall to kind of get the overall net energy mix. The net energy on the system. So once you have the energy mix that's created, we wanted to make sure that to show like that battery component, like what is battery participating in the overall energy mix, but we also want to be cognizant that batteries are ultimately a net load on the system. So that next line over where it says best energy required, that is the amount of energy that is expected to be required to be able to utilize the storage of battery generation to the left. You can see that it's slightly larger than the box for battery storage on the left. As you move to the right, we also take into account the market purchases and sales. Overall, in this situation, you can see that there's a slight expectation of market sales over market purchases at this point in time in 2040 on the constrained planning scenario. And then to the right, you finally get the overall sum of energy mix. Not energy mix, the sum of the energy on the system after you take into account the influence of both battery charging, market sales, and market purchases. So we'll move on to the next slide. This run is one of the only runs that we actually got production costs done on. So just real quickly, this is just the market interaction generally through time on that base case scenario. In some of our preliminary runs that the production cost runs on the other scenarios, the low forecast and the unconstrained forecast, we see some different changes in how the market interacts between purchases and sales based upon these base scenarios. And we'll probably extend that conversation at a later date when we have more production cost scenarios. But in general, this is what the overall market interaction is for the constrained planning forecast. All right. So the next group of slides, exact same set of slides except for the last two. So we're just going to be talking about the capacity expansions for the unconstrained planning forecast. Now in this scenario, what we are assuming, and it's most prevalent if you're flipping back and forth between these two nameplate slides on the constrained and unconstrained forecast, that the peak system demand line and the PRM line, you're going to see a difference in variation of how that line looks. So in the constrained planning forecast, we see more of an S-shaped curve, and in the unconstrained, we see much more of a bump in the left side of the graph. That represents the unconstrained forecast representing the demand on the system today, that we do not see the available resources, or the system is being impacted on a transmission constraint that we can't serve. In this scenario, what you can see is a much larger development, though, of renewables and battery storage in the near term. There's a couple of reasons for that. Well, there's two main reasons for that. One is that the ability for the system to take advantage of tax credits before they are no longer available after 2030, and also that we have enforced inside the model in all scenarios that the model cannot select thermal generation before 2032. So you're seeing a larger increase in renewables in the near term. That ultimately affects the overall system resource mix in 2047. So all the same assumptions on the thermal resources between all scenarios. The difference here is that you're seeing much more renewable development in the near term, and that ultimately affects resource selections in the future. The kind of takeaway that I have here is that for every megawatt of renewable energy that you select today has an impact on what thermal generation resources are selected in the out years. So that's kind of like the most interesting takeaway to me. Also, just that the near-term need, if we can solution for it, which SPS doesn't necessarily see that as a possibility because we just aren't seeing those types of resources available to us in the near term, it would have an effect on resource selection through time. So we'll go to the next slide. You can see that same kind of situation kind of plays out from the constrained planning forecast to the unconstrained planning forecast on a slight overbuild on the summer accredited capacity position because of that winter binding constraint. But you can see that the batteries are taking a little bit more of the capacity, or not taking it more, but providing more capacity on the system through all years. And you see a much less contribution from thermal generation supporting system needs by 2047. Go to the next graphic, and here is our winter accredited capacity position. You can see what the resource selection over the PRM requirement is pretty much gone. It's solving to this requirement, and you can also see that accreditation for resource types is generally smaller for the different ELCC affected resources. All right. Now we got the load planning forecast. So this just represents a lower bound limit. It does not necessarily represent what SPS thinks is going to happen. It just represents a lower bound limit of the demand forecasts. In this one, you can see it's a fairly significant drop in overall nameplate of resources to meet system needs. However, what you can still see is that there is still an expectation of thermal generation being required to replace SPS's existing fleet of steam boilers. So that yellow line is really the gas steam turbines, and you can see how that shrinks over time, and there's no real replacement. We don't replace with gas steam, but it still needs to have that firm dispatchable capacity. And overall, you need to have an addition of both CC and CTs to maintain that firm dispatchable capacity on the system throughout the entire planning horizon. So no matter which forecast that you're looking at, there is an expectation of all resource types being required to solution out SPS's need through time. All right, we'll jump to the next slide. Even in this low planning forecast, you can still see a slight overbuild of resources over the PRM requirement. But in general, it's a similar conversation between the last two forecasts that we've been showing. All right, and then the winter capacity position. So, all right, go to the next slide. Now,
Justin, before you give this summary, let me just remind stakeholders about your model analysis that is done system-wide as opposed to jurisdictional specific. So,
yes, ma'am.
yeah, because would you please remind folks why you're doing that and that those slides represent, I assume, the system-wide planning numbers.
Yes, yes. So thank you for that, Margie. All of the scenarios represent building out for a system-wide requirement, and that is for customer. That's the least cost solution to solve both the Texas and New Mexico needs without the consideration of any state-specific requirements, either from Texas or New Mexico. So we don't start adding or layering in any state-specific requirements until we get to our ETA section, which was the third column over on the modeling tree. So everything that you're seeing here is not isolated to solving only New Mexico's requirement, only Texas. It is a system-wide requirement for SPS to solve its needs. So these next couple of slides, what we have is the resource selection limit assumptions that were utilized in those builds, and then also just taking and then we'll show another slide that just puts all of the plans together and just shows exactly what is being built across all forecasting scenarios. In general, what you can see is that between the constrained, unconstrained, and low forecasts, there's kind of a difference on how the model has resources available to it prior to 2032. So 2032 is kind of like that period of time where we're thinking we're getting into that period where what is going to be available is going to be available, and we will be limited by resources to it. In the constrained forecast, that's where we have these limits set up here. And then we set them up to around 1,000 megawatts before 2031. And then after 2032, we assume that those resource constraints or resource availability constraints would be relieved, and we go up to about 1,500 megawatts per year. We also still limit the model just on total megawatts that it can build of a technology type, just for the expectation of how much you can physically build in a single year. What we see, though, is that the model is not necessarily hitting the limits on all scenarios in these things. It does at times, and we can talk about that specifically when we get to the L&R review. But you can see that in the unconstrained planning forecast, we did increase those limits above what we think we can expect in the near term, just to represent the idea of if everything was possible, what could we do? And that's why we bumped it up to about 3,000 megawatts. It ultimately does not select 3,000 megawatts of each technology type in that, but it is a limit that we enforce just so that the model would have some expectation of being able to build those resources at will if it needed to. You can also see on the far right, we have the limits on the combined cycles and the combustion turbines. In general, what we allowed was that the combined cycles, you could build at least one a year. It's not required to build one a year, but it can build up to ACC every single year after 2032. And then for combustion turbines, we allowed it to, I think I see a question. With the combustion turbines, we allowed it to build at least or up to 2 CTs per year after 2032. So I think we got some questions. I don't know if this is a good spot to. All right, so Darren, you asked, does the CCGT build out assume that EPA vacates the new source performance standards for those resources, or is it assuming carbon capture or low carbon fuel? We did not add any kind of uh, environmental constraints to either related to the new source performance standards or carbon capture or low carbon fuel for the combined cycles.
I guess I was just asking that, Justin, because that was an issue with selecting combined cycle in the last CCN case. That because carbon capture was required, it just wasn't cost effective.
Yes, and what I would just say is that it's also moving through time as we're going forward. So does SPS's assumption, does Xcel Energy's assumptions change on what can be expected over time? And at the time of the self-build teams of development of those resources and the time of the selection of those resources, there was a different assumption about those requirements than what SPS assumes now. And I see two more hands up.
Justin, let's have you finish this piece and then we'll go to the questions. We saw a couple hands up. So let you finish and then we'll open up to questions.
Okay. All right, so move on to the next slide. So this information is just on the nameplate additions. It's the exact same information that you've seen. It's just presented a little bit differently so that you can see between the scenarios in one slide. So on the left hand, you can see by 2032 additions. And so you can see that on the left hand side, you see development of wind, solar, and battery. In the constrained forecast, we do see 1 CT coming in. As we move to the right, 2033 through 40, you can see the resource additions, and these are all incremental additions. So what you're seeing is just the amount of resources that the model is adding before 2032, and then just the resources that are being added in 23 through 40, and then just the resources added between 2041 and 47. And on the right, you take all those different graphs to the left and you add them up to get a total. So these are not incremental builds through time. It's not cumulative through time. It is incremental resources for each period of time and then a total at the right. So just a little bit on the right-hand side, what you see overall, what you see is that all resource types are being required through SPS's different load forecasting scenarios, and the expectation of a base thermal generation of both CCs and CTs, and then renewables and batteries on top of that. All right. Margie, would you like it to open up to conversations, or you want me to go to the sensitivity section?
Let's go ahead and finish the sensitivities. I think it's just a few more slides, Justin, and then we'll open up to questions on both of these parts. Thanks.
Okay. All right, and we won't spend too much time on this. We did get these sensitivities, the expansion plan to develop. We did not have the production cost runs, but I thought it was just it was informative to also give this other perspective of like low gas price sensitivity and the high gas price sensitivity. So what we're seeing is that in this low forecast sensitivity, we see that ultimately, excuse me one second, look at this for a second, make sure I'm on the same page. Can you flick to the next slide real quick, Linda? I apologize. Make sure yeah. Okay. So on the low forecast sensitivity, what we see is that the model relies more on the thermal generation. Sorry, I'm getting like a bunch of pop-ups in front of my screen. More thermal utilization in the low gas price forecast sensitivities, which makes sense. Low gas pricing, it sees the value of thermal generation and it forgoes the selection of renewables. And then when we go to the next slide, this is a high gas price sensitivity, and you're going to see lower capacity factors on like the CDCs, and then you're going to see more renewable development. Overall, though, in these high gas price sensitivities, you're limiting the selection of thermal resources in favor of selecting renewable technologies, but you ultimately end up having to select um, uh, much more resources on a nameplate basis of those technology types to solution out the need. Originally, we actually had all of these slides set to basically like a 22,000 megawatt on the y-axis, and we actually had to increase all of the slide heights because of this forecast because it went so high. Just an FYI. This is the slide here that ultimately helped us determine what the y-axis was going to be for all of the graphics that we saw. All right. So if you have any modeling run requests, we've provided a form. There's some basic questions that relate to the sensitivities that we talked about earlier, and also some of the conversations about data centers and what we're going to be running in those data center sensitivities. You can click there, or you can either click the hyperlink on the presentation, or you can scan that QR code to get taken to that form. We also have an open section, so if the questions don't grasp or don't capture the things that you're looking for, you can write in a scenario or a sensitivity or something that you would like to have some clarification on. And we do ask that you provide your email address and your name. It helps us to make sure that we can, if we have questions or if we're trying to, either understand or maybe, vet out this information a little bit better, it is helpful for us to be able to contact you and get more clarification. We just want to make sure that we're hitting the mark for you. So, Margie, would you like us to open it up now for questions?
Yeah, let me just add a comment. We'll come back and talk about the due date for these model run requests. We might want to shift the date a bit. We're talking with the team at SPS about the right time frame. Kind of depends on what people need for that, but we'll come back to that later in the workshop. For now, let's go ahead and open up questions. I see Jonathan and Chelsea. Please come off mute, state your name and organization again, and your question at this point for Justin. Thank you. Jonathan, go ahead.
Oh, hey, good morning. Jonathan Lee on behalf of OPL. My question is going to take us kind of far back in time to slides 10 and 11.
Oh,
It's okay.
sorry
Um,
about that.
That's good.
yeah,
It's
sorry.
okay.
No, you were in a flow, so I didn't want to disrupt your rhythm.
Okay, how
Um,
can I help you?
so 2040, this question kind of concerns the interplay of the sales and purchases. 2040 seems to be kind of an anomaly if we look at slide 11 because it shows that market purchases and sales kind of come out in the wash.
Hmm.
But for much of this forecast period, it looks like the sales are significantly below the purchases. Is there
Mhm.
any concern about perhaps like underbuilding or like a heavy reliance on market purchases to meet needs?
Yes, and I appreciate that, Jonathan. The question. We were really hoping to be able to have some more production cost runs and scenarios to be able to have this conversation because what we do see is a lot of variability in how the market interactions work between the different scenarios, either the high gas
Mhm.
sensitivity, the low gas sensitivity, these low planning forecasts, the unconstrained. There's a lot of variability in how these market interactions happen. For instance, the unconstrained planning forecast, when you're front loading the system with renewables, this dynamic completely shifts, and you become a a net seller into the market in the same period that we're showing net purchases. So um, there's the resource selection types and timing can have a lot of effect on the market interactions. In the low forecast scenario, we basically see the lines right on top of each other. They're right on top of each other. They're constantly, within, a couple hundred of, sales and purchases through time. And also the gas price sensitivities can widely affect um, the overall market purchasing and selling. What I would generally say is in our very first preliminary runs of the island approach, where we're just turning off the markets, right? So, and I think that this might be informative to our conversation earlier. I know that it sounds like we might have some interest in running some other versions of what an island approach looks like, but just in the island approaches that we have produced, what we are seeing is that when we turn the markets off, every year after that, we have unserved energy. Um, so what that kind of indicates to me is that there is an inherent amount of reliability or energy that the market is helpful in providing. It's not necessarily just a market mechanism, but also it is a supply of energy onto the system that is available. Um, I would say that in general, the model the model what do you, one second. You were complimenting me on being on the flow now, and I just slightly lost my train of thought. So, but the in general, there is an expectation of reliability from the market, but the market does not have any capacity value.
Mhm.
So there is no capacity value associated with it. And we also are turning the markets off during the capacity expansion. So is the system not selecting enough resources? I would say no. Generally, what we see is that um, when we turn the markets off and we run our expansion plans, the model is selecting a sufficient amount of resources. And when we go to the production costing runs, under our assumptions, um, there is no EUE. It's when you turn the markets off that you do have EUE. In general, and what we've done in the last CCN filings, and you've probably read through this, is we did do extreme weather testing on the scenarios where we have like 2 week periods where we pressure test the system and we say, hey, you've got a 2 week winter storm event, or you've got a 2 week summer event, like a heat wave, and we turn the markets off during those approach and we see if there's any unserved energy. And what we see is like during those situations, the model is able to to uh, successfully complete the extreme weather events with the resource selections that we've selected so far. Um, I would say that's when you start looking at every 8,760 hours a year, or 8,760 hours a year over a 20-year planning horizon, and you turn the markets off and you say that you never can access that market, um, it does put a strain on the system because you do have to take outages on thermal resources, or there are droughts in either wind production from lack of wind, or cloudy days, things like that. So the market does provide a source of energy for the system that the system needs. Jonathan, does that get at your question, or is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was very thorough and interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Chelsea, I see you've got your hand up. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, this is Chelsea Hoteling with Energy Futures Group. I was hoping I could ask two different questions. The first question was just, in looking at the nameplate capacity addition, bar charts, it seems like you kind of have a swap for existing CC resources and new generic CC resources sometimes, when that starts in 2033. And I guess I was just wondering, is there any possibility of extending any of those contracts? If there is there, any worthwhile testing of runs to see, what would happen to the expansion plan? And the second question, I was hoping to ask a question on the SPP market limit, but I don't know if you want to take them one at a time.
Probably so.
Okay.
But I'll take the first one. Your question, let me make sure that I'm framing it right. You see, you see a series of retirements of our existing thermal generation, and you see a swap for new resources. in the 2030s. And you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I see as well. I was at the end of this presentation, if we still had additional questions, actually have the LNR up in a spreadsheet. And if people want to get into that kind of weeds, I'm ready and willing to have that conversation about exactly what resources we're retiring. But I think it definitely lends itself to a conversation about resource extensions. I think I don't know about you know, do we model what a scenario looks like with resource extensions? I'm not so sure that really is I, I'm open to the conversation, but I question the ability for that to provide value because it kind of makes the assumption that some of these units can be extended or that we know what the cost of these extensions would be when they're happening out in the 2030s and 40s. A lot of these units, this yellow bar that we're talking, or I'm sorry, not yellow bar, but series of yellow bars through time that kind of makes a streak through the graphic. A lot of those units are all of our gas steam turbines. Um, Several of those units are in their 70s. I mean, very, very old units that have been extended a long time. In fact, 4 units were extended in the last RFP. We had Nichols 1, Nichols 2, Plan X4, and Maddox all extended in that RFP. And the reason that they were extended is that in the last IRP, the 23 IRP, we um, went through the entire analysis, and in our statement of need, we identified that SPS would, in addition to putting an RFP out, that they would compare the cost of extending these units to bids. And we did that. And what we saw is that it was more economical to extend those 4 units, which represented 521 megawatts of nameplate capacity, extending those units for I think it was between 7 and 8 years. Don't quote me on that for sure. But it was a significant extension that ultimately provided a significant value to the portfolio as compared to not extending them. And I think that that's a conversation that we should absolutely be having and be discussing in the IRP. I just don't know that modeling and assuming that every one of these units can be extended or that we know the exact cost of what those extensions would be. I think the better conversation point, at least for me at this point, and I'm still open to conversation about it, is the system is still identifying a need for thermal generation on the system, whether that's extension or replacement. Or I'm sorry, extension or replacement. The system is needing it. Chelsea,
Yeah, no,
does that solve? I'm sorry.
yeah, no, sorry, I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're fine. I just gonna ask you if that was what you were getting at, or if you any other thoughts.
Yeah, no, and just to clarify, I'm not trying to suggest that you can extend everything. I understand that there's age-based limits. I guess I was just curious more about the existing combined cycles, if those are, of age where they could be extended. I think we're just in a paradigm right now where CC costs are not coming down. Each successive case I'm in, like we're seeing 50% increases like year over year on cases for, utilities that are trying to come in for building a gas plant. So I think the question just becomes like, can we utilize our existing fleet? What does that cost look like? What is that cost trade-off? And so that's why I was just curious if, there's an opportunity for that. And especially maybe when you get into the scenarios where I'm uncertain about, some of the sensitivities I believe that are looking at like advanced technologies, but if you're not allowing them to be selected until the late 2030s or late 2040s, like maybe a pairing of a extension of some of these units would align with when some of those technologies might become available. So that's just why I'm kind of thinking like it could be worthwhile. I understand there's limitations on cost data, studies would likely need to be done, but just wanted to, I guess, probe if there's a possibility there or any kind of avenue for some of the units, with the understanding that I recognize that there's limits there. So that's just what I would offer in response.
Yeah, if I can just tug on this just a little bit more, because
Yep.
if you're okay with it, the CCs that are currently on the SPS system are all PPAs. So that is one kind of complexity here, and not that you can't extend a PPA, but it does provide some additional kind of color commentary. I would think that for me personally, the conversation that you're having on like the possibility of extensions should really be focused more on the gas steam generation on the SPS system. Like for SPS, gas steam generation is traditionally been the backbone of the system. I mean, I think about before Harrington was converted from coal to gas, we had a significant amount of coal generation between Tolk 1 and Tolk 2, Harrington 1, 2, and 3. You can see that the last of our coal generation with Tolk being retired in 2028. That this is a summer graph. So what you're seeing is that just for anybody that might be a part of the last filings, that coal, if you're looking at this on a nameplate basis, you would actually see that into 2029 because that would be the winter. But the steam turbines were really the backbone of the SPS system. And what we're seeing is that they're going away. And that yellow bar outsizely represents very dated units. And so that is where I think a lot of that conversation is. And then the red, which is the combined cycles, those are PPAs. And I think that might be an interesting conversation in of itself, talking about historical performance of those units. I think that the opportunity to extend is there for some of these, or potentially extend PPAs or have conversations about those. But also just reviewing the past performance of these resources through time as they age. So, Chelsea, I could talk about this stuff all day long. I don't mean to talk your ear off, but does that help?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Like I said, I just wanted to offer it as just probing if there was any consideration for it. I understand, there you may not want it in your base case, right? In all of your modeling runs, right? Because then you're leaning on assumption that you could extend or enter into the PPAs. But I guess I was just curious about just maybe testing, one scenario, just to see what the impact might be. So I appreciate your response on that. If I can still ask another question, or I'm happy to go back in the queue if I need to.
No, please continue, Chelsea. After your question, we'll take a quick break and come back to the Q&A, but please go ahead with your second question.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious about when you do get to the production cost stage and you model the interaction with SPP, do you have to enforce constraints in the model, like either on an hourly or an annual basis, to try to manage what that interaction looks like, or do you just model like a straight assumption that mirrors like your physical intertie with SPP?
Yeah, we do model our intertie, and on if you go back to GridWorks has been gracious to be able to host all of our presentation material, and I believe that we do have some conversations specifically about model topology that might help you with your question on
Okay,
SPS's interaction with SPP and the assumption of its constraints to the system.
great, thank you. I appreciate that.
Nikhil, I see you have a question in the chat. Can we start back with you, Nikhil, after a 10-minute break, and we'll continue the Q&A on this topic if that works for you.
Sure, Margie.
Great.
That's
Okay,
totally.
we'll come. You're first up after a 10-minute break. This is great conversation. We'll continue it, but we want to give you a stretch break. I showed 10:28 a.m. Mountain Time. Let's come back at 10:38 after you've all had a chance to stretch, grab a beverage, and we'll be back with Nikhil first up on the questions. So quick break till 10:38 Mountain Time. Welcome back, everyone. We'll continue with our great discussion and questions about the modeling analyses and interests by stakeholders. So I think we are back to the question that I think Nikhil, please state your name and your organization again so people get to know you and your question. Then we'll continue with other questions. Folks, feel free to raise your hand in Zoom and we'll call on you as we go through additional questions here. So Nikhil, over to you.
Thanks, Margie. Uh, yeah, I didn't want to break the flow either. So this is building on Chelsea's question. So I think you made a comment about the fact that the gas steam units was sort of the backbone of the system, and I recognize we don't have all the production costs run. So was curious, one, are these units really operated heavily? I mean, I recognize the 70-year-old units. So, maybe we'll find out the answers later. And then early on, you had made a comment about, as we are as you're limiting the thermal build out, past 2032, so you see renewables being built early on, and then there's almost a 1:1 correlation to the build out of renewables versus thermal. I was just, maybe if you could speak to that a little bit more, like, is that mostly on a capacity basis or also, yeah, I guess it's mostly capacity. So the energy needs, I couldn't grasp that as you were talking through that.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. So I would say in general, like I mean, the modeling scenarios and the sensitivities, definitely influence the capacity factors on the steam generation in here. But we do see the steam generation consistently operating. It's not operating like peakers. I would say that well over 40-50% of the time you would in the modeling that you can see that the steam units are operating. Now that's just a category that I'm kind of quoting right now. It's not necessarily like specific units, but in general, yes, they're not operating as peakers. Now, are they necessarily operating at 90% capacity factor all the time? No, but it's not in the 20% range that you would kind of be associating with. On your second part of your question, I think you're curious about our resource selection limits, and you were saying a 1-for-1. You think that can you maybe point us to a slide that you'd like to discuss, and maybe we can get some visually to walk through.
Yeah, Justin, thanks for your first answer. So yeah, I mean that's fascinating, the operating profile of the gas steam units. But I think you made the comment. I don't recall which slide you were saying that on, but you just said, your observation was that, you're putting renewables right now because there's, you don't allow any thermals to be built until 2032. And maybe it was just your observation, which was, you're seeing renewables build out now, and then in 2030, past 2032, you see the thermal build out, and the amounts are almost the same. Or maybe I just misread what you were saying.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of misreading. I think that what we were kind of getting was we aren't allowing any of the. Can we go to let's just go to the constrained nameplate. It's from one of the very first slides. Linda. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm making you bounce around everywhere. Yeah, there we go. So, we're seeing these like the thermal generation coming on, and depending on some of these sensitivities that we've seen, it's not always like right at 2033. Maybe it's a little bit later, maybe it's a little bit, but the model starts selecting that, and you can see in 2032 we have just like the one CT being selected, and then CC is coming in 2033. So they're not necessarily hitting that maximum limit on additions as soon as it's available to hit it. So I don't think that it's like a one-for-one replacement. But what I was trying to get at is like by the end of the model, you're seeing a need for replacement of the existing thermal and something that looks like our existing thermal generation today, something that is firm and dispatchable.
Okay.
And that's what I'm trying to get at here is like not necessarily like a one-for-one replacement, but that as you are going through time, you are still seeing a need for something that is firm and dispatchable, and today looks like CCs and CTs. Now, in the future, could that technology be different? That may have a profile or an operating profile that looks like a CT or CC, but is a different technology? Absolutely. But we're seeing something that needs to be filling that gap that looks like what we are assuming CC and CTs would be doing today.
Thank you. Helpful.
Yes, Chelsea.
Great. Thanks, Nikhil. Before we go to
Oh, sorry.
Chelsea, let me just I know we have had some excellent questions in the past from some other stakeholders. I don't know if others want to get in at this point before I go back to Chelsea. We have plenty of time for questions, but let me do a little bit of a suggestion. I know that we've got some great experts and resources on the phone from stakeholders, including Carrie Hatley, Chris Leger, any you folks that have been very active participants in the past. Want to encourage you to ask questions, and so while you're thinking, if you have any questions, we'll go to Chelsea for your next question, and then want to encourage hearing from some others if you have questions about this. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Oh, thank you. Hi, this is Chelsea Hoteling with Energy Futures Group. I was just a quick question on the generic battery categorization in these charts. Is that just 4 hour battery, or are you also modeling like 6 or 8 hour or a different duration?
Yeah, right now we're just modeling the 4-hour batteries. I think that we can definitely provide some sensitivities on 6 and 8 hour batteries. In general, what we saw was, um, you know, when you, uh, I'm not necessarily seeing in our initial modeling runs, like there was a clear indication of what technologies that should provide some incremental difference on like these broad stroke looks. And so we utilize the 4-hour batteries because that's what we see being bid and that's what we see being available to us in the SPP marketplace. So there definitely can be some assumptions, changes there on some sensitivities around 6 or 8 hour batteries. We do have those generic resource types, to be able to model against. But right now we are just assuming 4 hours in these runs.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. Any other questions? Also want to give an opportunity for any of our stakeholders from the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, including Darren and Orland and others. If you have questions so far about the base case model results to date, please, here's a great opportunity to ask questions. So let's give a few minutes in case people have additional questions, Justin. And then maybe if you wanted to dig into some of the details that you thinking about sharing from your spreadsheet, we can do that as well. But let's give a few minutes for other questions from stakeholders.
Nothing for me at this time.
Okay, thanks, Orland. Appreciate you being here.
Margie, I'll jump in. Well, maybe a couple of folks are composing their thoughts. If we could go to slide 22, please. The nameplate additions over through time there. Yeah, Justin, could you frame for us the time periods as we look ahead to statement of need and action plan? How will those pieces of work factor into the time segments that you've got on this slide?
That's a fantastic question that I don't know that I fully have a complete answer on yet, because I think that some of I think that some of the additional sensitivities and modeling scenarios that we're talking about might help inform that. I do see both like a near-term statement of need requirement, as a system-wide resources. I also think that, and we've identified this before, specific situations in our long-term optimization period that we are seeing upcoming things that we need to be addressing. One specifically is we've talked a little bit about this, is Clay County, Tucumcari. We have a retiring CT at that location. We have an obligation right now at that, for generation at that location. And I think that that's a very good opportunity to be looking at firm dispatchable technologies that are in alignment with the RPS standard and comparing those against existing technologies today. So I think that there's probably a couple things in the statement of need. I haven't vetted any of these comments by anybody yet, but I do think that we should be potentially looking at those very project-specific situations and incorporating them in the IRP and potentially issuing RFPs or at least in request for information on some of our specific challenges. We've talked a little bit about the steam generation as it's retiring, and we've also talked about the expiring PPAs. We have a number of our wind PPAs that are expiring in the 2030s, and with the tax credits no longer being available in those periods of time, taking a specific look on those situations, because they can, without some active plan today, those could represent a backsliding on meeting the RPS goals as those wind projects are expiring. What is the plan in a situation where today we're seeing wind and solar being selected? We also saw in the last RFP that sometimes our assumptions on what pricing is going to be for generics doesn't align with actual projects. We do our very best to make sure that we're getting the best generic information. But as we are coming through time and we're trying to make incremental improvements towards RPS, we are starting to come into the end of the life of some of those initial projects that were helping us meet those requirements, and was like the specific goal around those things. So I see the statement of need being multifaceted, both a system-wide near-term need, additional requests for information for future technologies that look like firm dispatchables today in the later years, and then also specific project locations and opportunities to either encourage emerging tech replacements or other ideas there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's certainly a challenge to plan given all the levers happening. Just to bound this for our group. So the planning horizon that we're looking at in this work can you give us the years for that?
Yes, we have it as 2027 through 2047 in all of our
Okay.
modeling work.
Okay. And then for the statement of need, do you have like a focus period or a time that you're thinking these additions need to come on that would be addressed through this statement of need, given that you're looking for a little bit longer term resources?
I don't know that I'm fully prepared to answer that statement today. I apologize, but
No.
it's such a big question,
Yeah.
and so it's such a big question, and there's such an immediate need. And
Okay.
that's part of my concern, and that's why we highlight this unconstrained forecast situation, is that when we put out these RFPs and we say we're looking for new generation to solve, let's just talk about the last RFP. We need up to 3,000 megawatts by 2032. These aren't actual numbers, but what we're characterizing today is that we have needs even greater than what we are requesting in the RFP. And where is that tipping point on selecting the right amount of resources to get to that need, and then trying to make some tangible improvements and forward looking, so that we're not constantly playing catch up and constantly chasing the capacity position, because chasing the capacity position, that does limit us to other resources that we have available to us in the RFP. And we are trying to get a little bit more foresight on the resource acquisition period to make sure that we're providing a fleet time. I will say that there are some very specific challenges with expanding the resource acquisition period of an RFP. and I'm kind of going off the cuff here, apologize, but um, the 24 dices is a very um, uh, important thing to be thinking about. That dices process in Southwest Power Pool determines the amount of transmission network upgrade costs that are assigned to projects. And they can be very influential about what prices are ultimately going to be associated with any one of these projects. And the 24 dices, the phase one, there's a phase one where numbers are assigned, a phase two where they're reevaluated, and then a potential restudy after that. And that process can take well over a year, and prices can be adjusting at all those times. So trying to make the best selection with the information that you have today, um, it can be very problematic when you have such a influential component on projects' levelized cost and bid evaluation. So there are some challenges about these longer term perspectives on resource acquisitions for the near term. One of the really, well, I keep going back to Clay County, and I'm sorry, I'm just kind of ranting here, so stop me if you need me to, Kathy. But
Nope, nope.
Quay County is very interesting because right now there's a 20 megawatt CT, 20 odd megawatt CT, and it needs to be replaced. And replacing that that location is going to be avoiding the issues with the network upgrade cost. It's a replacement. So that kind of component can be taken off the board. And we have an opportunity with replacement generation when it presents itself. I would not necessarily say that Quake County is can really be extended. It needs to be replaced. But when we're starting to talk about these extensions and what is replacing units at these resources, being able to float those retirement dates, is that a possibility? That's a great lever for us to be able to pull to making sure that we're able to get the best technology that aligns with either state policy goals or with the least cost scenarios, making sure that we're providing the greatest value at the least impact to customers today. And I think that the replacement generation components are our best opportunity to do that. However, we do have incremental growth on the system, and it's substantial incremental growth. And so it is a little bit of a balancing act on trying to make sure that we are fulfilling our obligations to customers and connecting them in a timely manner, and also making sure that we are doing it the most cost-effective way in the near term. And right now, the demand is outpacing our forecasts.
Thank you. Yep. Yep. I appreciate the trade-offs that you all are on through your modeling analysis.
Yeah, Justin, one more question that many of stakeholders have this question when we've gone through this process regarding demand response and behind the meter solar. I know there was a asterisk on slide 10 that mentioned demand response and distributed solar wasn't in the is included in the modeling, but it doesn't show up visually in slide 10 or 9. Could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and remind the group a little bit about your assumptions regarding demand response and distributed solar?
Yeah, so there, like demand response, that's really like a capacity tool. So you're not going to see that kind of pop up in here, but we want people to understand that those things are incorporated in our modeling. And when we go to the LNR table, if we want to look at that, you can see the demand response as a component. I do think that there's some specific challenges around demand response. Specifically, it requires participation. And SPP, Southwest Power Pool, is currently trying to make sure that their resource adequacy requirements are responsive to utilizing it as a tool, but also not overvaluing its ability to contribute to meaningful reductions to the peak. Some of that right today, demand response can really just be considered what they call a load modification to your forecast. In the future, SPP is moving towards a post-season analysis. So it's not today, if you're forecasting and you're forecasting, a certain peak in the summer, and you're also forecasting an amount of demand response that's going to be available. You may not call on that demand response, and that's okay because it's a forecast, and you're able to get what you assumed the reduction would be. You're just assuming that reduction. In the future, in 27, and for sure in 28, it might be 27. I've heard a couple of things back and forth. When you go to a postseason analysis, there is no reduction to a forecast. It is what is your peak, and the reduction that you can be attributing to demand response is only going to be based upon two pathways. One is, did it actually get called, and did it reduce your peak, and or it being registered as a market resource where SPP is controlling that, and it gets an actual credit capacity as a resource in that world. Both methods, though, really require both customers signing up for those programs at first, and then also responding and operating as those demand response programs. So relying on these things, especially in like a long-term planning situation, the tariffs are written in a way to make sure that we have some expectation to be able to rely on those. But if customers, should it be the expectation that you expect demand response to be there in 20 years or in 15 years? Currently, we have those incorporated in the LNR, but is that a valid assumption? I think that's a valid debate that should be had, and it's happening at Southwest Power Pool about how can you rely, or what should the reliability expectations be around something like demand response. Another component is also seasonal variability. Bye, Orland. Appreciate you being here. The seasonal component, can the demand response, the same demand response that you're assuming in summer, are you assuming that in winter? Do those things operate the same? Do people, if you were needing, if you're looking at the winter, I mean, is demand response make sense for a customer to sign up? And if that's the case, if you're not able to get those customers to sign up in that, what is it really helping you avoid the cost of additional capacity if you're trying to target a winter PRM and a winter reliability issue, if people are not signing up for that? So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. I don't see any other hands up. And so I'm suggesting we now switch gears a bit and pivot to the conversation back around stakeholder modeling run requests. Now, stakeholders have had a chance to get a glimpse of some of the modeling results to date. Some inherent assumptions and inputs are a part of that. But Linda, perhaps we can go back to the modeling tree slide for this conversation. And I think I would suggest we use this last block of time that we have to really go back to the conversation about stakeholders' ideas and interests in the modeling runs. Perhaps we start back with the conversation on the islanded scenario there, where Justin, we had quite a bit of discussion, and I know both Darren and Chelsea had some thoughts about that particular scenario. I don't know if there's also conversation that's necessary to have about assumptions regarding extensions or expansions of thermal resources. But let's go back to our stakeholder interests on this and ask Justin, Chelsea, Darren, do you have an idea of what a model run would look like that might be around the islanded scenario? Justin, I'm thinking this would be informative for people to either not have to fill out a run request or be more informed on their run request on this topic. So do you want to say more or ask more questions, Justin, to particularly Chelsea and Darren regarding what might be a modification of what you're already planning to do for that run?
I can ask a question. I think I saw Darren, you turn your camera on. If you got some initial kickoff thoughts, I think it'd be great to have a conversation.
Well, no, I mean, I understand the limitations you have there. I mean, you're basically just looking at the energy piece of that, and that the capacity model isn't really cognizant of it if it's in the market or not. Um, it was just mainly to, a truly islanded, an SPS, SPP divorce situation would open up all sorts of different things. And you know, in this last CCN case, Commissioner O'Connell certainly voiced his concerns about the SPP lag and how it squashes competition with the DICES process, potentially because only a small handful of folks have interconnections with SPP, and so that it stymies competition, unfortunately, in a free market. Um, and then our concern with the PRM requirements, but if you're saying that Excel would probably use the same winter PRM, even though you know, as you've shown, it really pads the numbers, the amount of capacity that you need by increasing that winter PRM along with the ELCC. I'm never really sure if the ELCC for SPS's wind and solar and batteries would be the same if it was looked at just on an SPS footprint or through an SPP footprint, since those are dictated through the SPP market. So there's a number of things when you say islanded. Are we truly islanded or are we just energy islanded? So that and what are the extent that you can look at that in an islanded mode, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah. So thank you, Darren. I appreciate that. A couple things. I do agree with the winter PM requirement, and I do think that there might be some adjustments to what those values are. SPS had advocated for a lower PRM requirement initially, when those numbers were being proposed. Um, and but I don't think it changes that there is a need there, and there does need to be some specific planning assumptions around that. We are investigating potentials, because we do have the requirement in 2028 for the evaluation of the SPP market. I think that talking about, uh, you know, like what you said, like the divorce of an SPS system from the SPP system, what would that entail? And that is something that we will be working on, is understanding exactly what those exit fees would be associated with that. Understanding the true cost and the total cost that is associated with that. Like these model runs, although we're just talking about energy, it does represent a significant data point, though. I think it represents that there is a place for the market on just being able to serve the energy needs of the system. We can demonstrate that there is an unexpected, or I'm sorry, an expected unserved energy when we just turn off the markets, and that's it. So I think that's a valid data point just to keep in mind. I think that there could be some a potential for an ELCC study or a PRM study, um, uh, associated with that 28 requirement that we see. Well, what would just be the SPS system? I also think for the accreditation of resources, yes, SPP ultimately is the one that is studying those values, but they are providing specific ELCC values for excuse me, for specific resources that are existing on the system. When we talk about generics, though, we also have just this, we are assuming, the same general resource type trends from SPP. And we have those slides in 22. If you get a chance to review those slides and you have some specific questions, we can definitely revisit those. But So there can be assumption differences, especially if SBS were to consider its to be its own balancing authority. And I think that is something that we will be investigating. I do want to go back to your comments though on the DICES and stifling competition. I just want to make sure that like when we're talking about that, the DICES process is a value add from SPP. It is identifying transmission network upgrades that are required to get that resource on the system and also to be able to deliver that generation to load in the system. So although we may have quibbles about like the timing process or the ultimate values or exactly what the assumptions are, and should this project get that value or not, in general, that is a process that has to happen. Like projects do have to be identified or do have to have an assumption of that they to get their generation delivered to load, that there would be some upgrades to the transmission system required. So although we may have differences on the specific values, I don't think that it's a full it's that it can be fully seen as a process that is stifling competition. It is a needed process for every resource that gets added to the system. I don't know if Darren, if I'm missing parts in your question or comments, but still love to have more conversation with you.
No, I think that that covers it. Yeah, it's just a matter of what does islanded mean, and it seems like it's more of an energy transfer island than a capacity reduction or change in the policies or any of that stuff. So, okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I agree with you. I will agree with you that like today in our capacity expansions, we're modeling the markets off as an energy uh, uh, parameter. We're cutting that off. But yes, in the capacity expansion, we are currently using our assumptions on ELCC accreditation and the PRM requirements from SPP in the expansion run on both the markets on and markets off approaches. So it
Okay.
is a good point to clarify. So thank you.
I guess one quick thing. I don't know if I got a full answer on my previous question about the combined cycle. Is that assuming that new combined cycle would have to implement carbon capture,
No, there's no assumption on carbon capture
even though
in the
that's
model.
the current law?
I'm sorry?
Even though that's the current law.
There is no assumption of carbon capture in the model right now, but we do have that as a scenario on the form that if people would like to, include some more
Okay.
detail
Because I
on
mean, that's
carbon
a big
capture.
cost adder.
I agree, and that's one thing that I may have been I probably should have expanded on is, these are our assumptions on the CC and CTs on our current cost expectations. What I would say is like over a 20-year planning period, though, what I think these things are is this is something that looks like a CC. It currently costs like a CC. It certainly operates like a CC, but it's just the expectation that something has to fill this gap. And is it thermal generation or something different? It might very well be something different, and that's one of the reasons that we have these different emerging tech scenarios, including like the nuclear sensitivity. Talking about replacement at Harrington with a nuclear resource. That was something we modeled in the last IRP. It wasn't a natively selected resource based upon least cost solution, but it was a forced in resource so we could get the delta to understand what is the added cost associated with a technology type like that. But I agree with you that there are challenges with what we're presenting here, but it is the solutions that we are seeing with the information that is available to us either from the market or our planning requirements that we have as compared to the load growth we're seeing.
Okay, thank you.
So let's go. Chelsea, I want to follow up with you on this islanded scenario while we're on that topic. And then Justin, what I think we'll do then is have you all share your modeling run request form and help stakeholders understand how to complete that and what it includes. But Chelsea, if you're still on, do you have any thoughts about modifications or adjustments to the islanded scenario or something different? Chelsea, I'd like to hear from you based on now that you've seen a little bit about the base case model results.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate you calling on me. I honestly need more time to think about this because I had a completely different thought of what the islanded scenario was. Like I thought the companies might have done like their own system specific analysis to determine, their own PRM and accreditation values. And so that would flow into the capacity expansion and production cost modeling. And so I don't, without having an analysis like that, I don't know if you could really try to incorporate that. Because what we have right now are based on SPP. And so I don't know if you could really extrapolate anything from that. So I'm still thinking on if there's a way to do an islanded scenario like what I thought it might be. So I just need a little bit more time to think if there's something I could propose or not.
Great, fair enough. Is there information you you need in order to be able to do that additional work? Or I guess I understand that you have requested access to the modeling data. So once you get in there to look around, perhaps if there's something missing, you can certainly let Linda Hudgens know and to help you with your thinking.
Yeah, I don't think there's any I don't think we would get to the specific data stage unless we figured out if there's a way that we could, and SVP agreed that there was a way to try to develop inputs to model a scenario that was like starting at the capacity expansion stage. And because I might also be misunderstanding what this scenario is trying to represent, because I also wasn't sure like if we are envisioning a world where the companies are in SPP, like, does that have other ramifications? Like, do you think you can build resources faster? Do you think they would be slower? Like, would your resource build limits change? Like, so I'm just living in a different book, I think, and that's my fault for misunderstanding what the scenario was. So, like I said, I just need to like bring myself back and just take a little bit of time to reflect on if there is something to suggest, or if or if I don't have any comments on this specific scenario.
Great. Okay. No, fair enough. I appreciate you doing the thinking about it. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just take a second to for Chelsea on your comment. We absolutely you mentioned like wrong book, but I think that conversation is going to happen. I think that is part of the conversation that we're looking to have on that requirement on our SPS on our Southwest Power Pool interactions in 2028. We do have a requirement to review our participation in the market, and I think that conversation is definitely geared at that. I don't know that we can fully capture everything that you talked about in this IRP process, but it does sound like very very aligned with what our requirements are for that activity.
Great. Thanks, Justin. So let's go ahead and shift gears to the run request itself. We are again considering the due date. The SPS team would request at least an initial response from folks by May 28th. If you're thinking about something, of course we can, and after we have this conversation, we'll also ask you all if an additional office hour or session is needed to talk about any topic between now and the next workshop, or if we need to modify that due date. But Justin and Linda, would you like to run through what the form looks like to assist people in familiarization?
Definitely. Yeah, so what we have here is just a standard Microsoft form. We'll compile all these results here, but we have basically two questions in an open text field. On this first question, we have this emerging tech to serve New Mexico and further the ETA goals. And we have these different scenarios that we had kind of been discussing in our sensitivities about do we want to model advanced nuclear at Harrington? Do folks think that that is an absolute? We have to understand what that is. Or, hey, we get it. That's not something that needs that level of granularity. That's what we mean by must, important, and not needed. So not needed is, hey, appreciate that, but it's not necessarily where we are seeing the future going on an emerging tech, so we don't need that. Or, hey, that's important. It's important to understand the ramifications, but there are things that are much more prescient on answering the questions today, and that's our must column. So we got 5 line items here. The advanced nuclear, geothermal, long duration storage, hydrogen conversion. The last one you can see is that carbon capture. And just so folks know, like I am, I'm not our policy expert on carbon capture. We do have some folks on here. I believe Zoe Elise is on here. If she would like to discuss anything about carbon capture, in case I may have misspoke about anything that's related to that. I don't know if she's on.
I'm on.
Okay.
Thanks, Justin. I think when it comes to carbon capture, I know, Justin, you were having kind of a conversation with Darren about showing what those costs would be. I think we can certainly do that, but I think what's important for us to understand is what the ETA allows and doesn't allow. And at this point in time, I don't believe that the ETA allows carbon capture to qualify an emitting resource as a zero carbon resource, and that's something we need to discuss and work on, frankly, in the state on a policy level. If folks are interested in pursuing that in order to meet the 2045 standards. So just throwing that out there as we go through the modeling on what we can use today to meet those 2045 standards and maybe what we want to work on in the future on a policy level. Thanks, Justin.
Well, I appreciate it, Zoe. Thank you for helping me out there. Okay, so that's question number 1. And then if we want to scroll down just a little bit, we get to question 2. And that's the data centers. So today, what we are expecting to model is like a single data center. So we'll take the planning, the constrained planning forecast, and we're just going to incrementally add on top of that a 1 gigawatt data center, and just the 1 gigawatt number, just so that we can see the real delta and understand exactly like what is required for some of these really large loads. What we're planning to do right now is definitely model the least cost. I think that is a must. I'd be interested to see if anybody has a different perspective on that. But also, do we want to also model that same data center being served with existing non-carbon emitting technologies? So, what does it look like for a 1 gigawatt data center to be served by wind and solar and batteries? We're open to some other thoughts on here, but it's a scenario that we'd like to get some feedback, make sure that we are actually hitting the mark and making sure that we're getting those runs out there that people feel are required. So, and then line item 3 is just the additional modeling sensitivity. So if you're not seeing something captured in here, give us a couple sentences about what you're thinking or what you're envisioning. I know that we've had some conversations about some specific ones around the island approach. If we want to continue that conversation, drop us a line here, or if something we haven't even touched base on yet, please write that in. And if you do write something in there, though, please put your name and email address so that we can make sure that we are, that we are understanding it and that we provide some feedback to you and say, like, this is what we're thinking about with that. Is that what you're kind of getting at? And we can kind of course correct if needed. But we just want to make sure that we're. So why is nuclear limited to Harrington location? That's a great question, Darren. And so we have thought a lot about. Okay, I'm sorry. I see another hand raised up. So we've thought a lot about, where do we put nuclear? The reason that we're picking Harrington location is that it's 1,000 megawatts, and it originally was coal generation. It's now gas generation. It's retiring in the mid 2040s, So you're going to have, that conversation that we were having earlier about, floating these retirement dates. That's an opportunity there. It's an existing location. It can avoid network upgrade costs because it's an existing location, and it also has a water supply. Those are some of the most critical components that we can think of. So when we're trying to figure out what is the best opportunity to get nuclear onto the system, um, it would be in a location that has a firm water supply, can avoid network upgrade costs because it's already like the pricing is already challenging. But what are things that could potentially help alleviate that? And that's that reason. So those are the reasons, Darren. We don't necessarily see other places on the system aligning with those same um, uh, benefits that really give that scenario a leg up on providing the best look or the best way possible for that to get on the system. Is there any more you'd like to add, Darren?
No, thanks for that. I worry about you had a difficult time with a solar installation at that location. I'm just wondering if the public there is amenable to that, but no, that explains the resource issue, I think. Thanks.
All
Thanks,
right.
Darren. I see, Chris, you've got your hand up. Chris Lezay, please name and organization and then proceed with your question.
Thank you. Chris Leger with the Interwest Energy Alliance. And I don't know if this is really a question, but just a thought after listening today. Um, my concern, and I don't know if it really results in additional or different modeling, is that it seems as if the base case is fundamentally incompatible with a couple areas of the law that currently exist, both the ETA, as discussed just recently, and then the new source performance standards that Darren was discussing earlier. And so I guess I don't understand why the base case should include potential violations of the law. And so uh, I don't think that a modeling scenario complying with the law is the reasonable way to go about bringing the IRP into compliance with the law.
All right. So there's a couple things there. The IRP specifically requires SPS to be seeking the least cost solution to service customers. We are also a multi-jurisdictional state, or multi-jurisdictional utility to serve both Texas and New Mexico customers. And in our last filings, or I'm sorry, the in the approvals of the last filings that we had for our thermal generation, one thing that was said, although we did not receive any exceptions in that CCN filing, the commission did say that exceptions are allowed and would be considered in the future. So I would say that there are, and I'm not a policy expert, so if we do have a policy expert that would like to step in, I would say that there are considerations for cost related to RCT in the RPS standard, and also in the ETA. What I would also say is
Hey,
that our
Justin,
yes,
I'll
ma'am.
just expand on that a little bit. Yeah, Chris, I hear what you're saying. But because of the requirements in the IRP to be modeling most cost-effective portfolio and the availability of exceptions in the ETA, I think SPS needs to be doing modeling like this to evaluate whether their portfolios that prevent undue impact to customer bills and maintain reliability that might not be ETA compliant, but that would serve the public interest, especially when it comes to affordability. So we have to look at the full picture there in order to evaluate fully what the most cost-effective portfolio is and whether we need to be asking for exceptions.
No, I understand what you're saying, Zoe. I guess I just think of it as the opposite direction. I think that the base case should include the current legal requirements, and a potential modeling run scenario would include what costs could be avoided by not complying. But I think I understand what you're saying. I guess I fundamentally disagree that the base case should include a idea that these are somewhat optional. I don't think that that's the way that the laws should be interpreted as the base case. But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, appreciate it, Chris. We appreciate your comments. Glad that you're here to help participate in the conversation, and we have noted it. Thank you.
Chris, can I follow up and ask, was it perhaps in the responses to the poll about meeting your interest, is it perhaps, did you respond that the answer no for these reasons?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I haven't been participating enough to have really
Okay.
put in yes or no. Plus, I also think yes or no is a really hard way to describe anything as it relates to anything complicated like IRPs.
Yeah, no, it's good, but I just wanted to probe. I think you've raised some good issues in terms of complying with current law in the base case. So I'm sure SPS will take that into consideration. And I just was trying to find out if there are folks that have some concerns about what's in the base case or the plan scenarios that we heard more. So I really appreciate you speaking up. Thank you. Chelsea, I see your hand is up. Please go ahead, Chelsea.
Yeah, thanks. This is Chelsea Hotelling with Energy Futures Group. I don't have a specific question. I guess I just would like to express maybe a little bit of concern about where we are in the process right now. So I don't know if that's appropriate to say now or if you want me to wait for another time.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to start off with saying that I completely understand how hard it is to do this modeling, how often you have to make changes to the model, lock in your assumptions, take in stakeholder feedback. Definitely recognize that, and I don't want to downplay that at all. My concern is just that there's a lot of data and additional assumptions that would be really great to have before we make stakeholder recommendations. For example, for some of I think there's some sensitivities, not scenarios, but what you might assume around, future resource technologies, costs, when they're available, resource build limits. I would really hate to, or I'd be worried about making a recommendation at this stage, then getting that data and then saying, oh, I wish I would have said something different. So I guess I'm struggling a little bit with when data might be provided, the level of data that might be provided, because I think there's some additional information that would be helpful to inform the stakeholder scenarios. And I know I think there was a comment earlier that there might be some flexibility in the state. And so if that is the case, I think that would be helpful. But I also would just recommend that if there is more data that could be provided, that would be, I think, really helpful to make sure that you are getting the best requests from stakeholders. Because otherwise, I think you're either going to have stakeholder regret, or you might be getting five iterations of requests that I'm assuming you probably would not have the time to do. And so I guess I just wanted to raise that as a question about what that time frame for data might be, what data might be provided, and if there's any flexibility on this date that's on the screen here. Thank you.
Great. Chelsea, so Linda, Justin, Jared, Zoe, can you talk about the availability of data through iManage, the schedule for that, and the content that will be there?
Yes. So a couple of just initial thoughts. In some of our previous presentations, we did provide some of our assumptions about where emerging tech's at and the costing information. If in your review of that information, if you're wanting some specific details behind some of those assumptions, please let us know. We can make available what we have. We don't necessarily know what to provide unless people ask us for what they're wanting. But we do have, information around generic costing, related to both, carbon capture, fuel information around hydrogen fuels. We have information about long duration storage, nuclear assumptions. We have all these different assumptions. If you're wanting those specific pieces of information, then we'd be more than happy to provide that. So we just ask that there is a lot of data, and we want to make sure that we're being responsive to providing that. And if there's something that you're wanting, please fill out our data access request form, and we can work on getting you what you need.
I might jump in here unless anyone else from the SPS team to add to Justin before I jump in. Okay. In the chat, I just dropped in 3 different links for those of you that do want to get into the data through the iManage system that SPS has provided. I'll note that right now we have 1 stakeholder who has made that request. So I really would encourage folks, this process is moving. We do have a deadline of filing in October. So SPS needs to move forward, but would really encourage the stakeholder group to seek out that information. And if you have questions on cost assumptions, resource technology viability, let's get into the data that's available to you.
So back to Chelsea, we recognize though that there needs to be some time for stakeholders to both review data that's been presented in past workshops and to turn in this request form for detailed information through iManage. In your mind, and we'll go back and talk with the SPS team about an extended date for the modeling run requests to give stakeholders time to process the available data. Sounds like we need to announce the clear path for requesting data. I don't think, Linda and Justin, you need to clarify, when someone turns out the data access request form, does it include what kind of data they want, or is it just simply an open request to all data that's being loaded on the iManage system?
Yeah, it is simply a request to access all of that data. There will be, excuse me, 2 folders on the iManage system, one for confidential data, one for public information. And so anyone that has asked for access but has not provided a confidentiality agreement will get access to just the one folder. And then those, of course, who have signed the conf agreement will get access to any of the confidential information that we must keep segregated.
Great. Chelsea, yeah, do you want a follow-up question, please? Chelsea, I think you're on mute. And Linda, can you clarify, has data been loaded in the confidential folder for those who have their confidential agreement already in?
No, there has been no data loaded. As Justin alluded to at the beginning, the modeling runs have been fast and furious up until about the time this, in the middle of the night last night. And so he needs to have his team do some QA, QC. I did answer a question via email to Chelsea today that once the materials are loaded to iManage, then whoever has made the request will get an email from the iManage system directing them to the correct place on that system.
Okay, great. So, Chelsea, let us take this as an action item, and other stakeholders, let us take this as an action item to follow up with you and with the SPS team to announce a date that gives stakeholders time to process that information and get some time before the modeling run request is required to be turned in. Clearly, if people have ideas now, don't hesitate to turn in the modeling run request form. And Linda's provided her email address there into the chat. But I think it does make sense for us to consider an extended date for these run request forms to be in. So please let us take that as an action. We've heard your request and we'll work to extend that such that modeling can continue, but stakeholders can get access to the data they need to inform those requests. So thank you for voicing your suggestion on that.
Margie, we might just recognize in the chat, Chelsea, wondering if it would be okay to send a list of the data that she would like to see.
Please.
I think that would be welcome, right, Linda?
Yes, that would be welcome. And that is why I provided my email just below that question. So I'm happy to collect those questions.
Great. Okay, so let's make that clear. Any stakeholder who's looking for specific data in order to inform a modeling run request, please send that list to Linda Hudgens at excelenergy.com. It would be appreciated if you would copy Deborah Shields at gridworks.org. Deb, if you would please put your email into the chat as well, so that we can assist in following up and understanding what stakeholders' needs are. That would be super helpful. So questions at any time, plus list of needed data to both Linda Hudgens and Deborah Shields at GridWorks would be a great path forward. And then we will take an action to review a schedule and announce some updated dates for the model run request forms. Thank you, Deborah, for putting your email in there. Let's see, we have about 20 minutes still left. I want to, Sam, please go ahead with your comment. Do you want to voice your comment?
Just any other questions about the current modeling tree, that would inform what we have currently as you're considering, other modeling runs to propose or sensitivities. We'd welcome any questions on that, or other questions generally that you haven't been able to ask today. So it's not the question inbox is not limited to things related to data inputs.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, so that leads to our next question to all of you. And Deb, if you'd please go ahead and share slide number 15 in our deck. We would like to hear from you all about whether or not you feel that we need to schedule a conversation, an office hour, some session for conversation about the modeling activities in advance of workshop 5, which is in June. It will be a 2 half-day session hybrid hosted in Hobbs, New Mexico. But we would like to ask that in advance of that, given that we are moving forward quickly with modeling, do you feel that there is a need for an office hour or some session before that time? Is there more that you want to discuss? And so please answer this poll. I'm hearing conversations could include things like the islanded scenario assumptions. They could include conversation about brainstorming the speed to connect. They could include discussion about assumptions for extension of thermal resources. It could include modeling the current law in a different way of a base case. So it looks like we'd like to know whether you're interested in an office hour in between now and June. So please respond to the poll. And if there are particular topics, either in the ones I've mentioned or other topics that you would like to be addressed in this office hour session, it'd be extremely helpful if you would put those into the chat now so that we can help design and that workshop, that session, and the SPS team can help do preparation for that. So please put any suggested topics that you would like for this session if you answered the question as yes.
Margie, we have a hand from Chelsea.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Sorry, it's Chelsea hoteling with Energy Futures Group again. Are there any like guardrails that we need to kind of have at the forefront of our mind about what we might be able to suggest? Like, I guess limits are probably the better word than guardrails, so sorry about that. Like for requesting a scenario, for example, like if we were interested in maybe looking at something that involved more energy efficiency or more demand response that seems to be outside of what might already be covered in some of the modeling trees. I think if I'm wrong on that, please correct me. But like, so if we suggested something like that, is that something where you just want to see stakeholders make that request? And then if it's something that can't go forward, you would have like a conversation with us about that? Or is there like, are there certain topics that we just should be aware of like now when we're thinking about these requests? Or yeah, to just trying to get a better understanding of what we could actually request.
Yeah, I
Justin,
don't.
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Margie.
Yeah,
I don't
Justin.
think I don't think that there's we don't want to stifle any kind of conversation about what stakeholders want to see. If you have a suggestion that that you're wanting to see, we please reach out to us. We may have we may get in touch with you and have some conversations about you know your concept and if it is currently covered or what I mean you mentioned demand response, like what are we currently assuming in demand response in the model. um, it's a significant component that we have not included in the past IRP. So I do think that please feel free to reach out and to suggest any kind of scenario you want. Now, we may not necessarily be able to model it, or we may have some suggestions on tailoring it, but I definitely think that we're interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
And James, we greatly appreciate your putting a topic into the chat for the next next office hour. Others of you who have answered yes, please also put the topics you'd like to have covered in the chat today before this workshop ends so that we can do some scheduling, planning, and communication regarding that session. So please add that into the chat. And I think at this point, we only have had 5 of you respond to this question. Anybody else, will give you one more chance to respond and put topics that you'd like to be followed up with in advance of the next workshop before we summarize from today and tell you what's next. So leave that open for a few minutes or a minute or so. All right, Deb, let's end the poll with a continued request to put your topics you'd like followed up with in the chat here so that we can plan and announce that. Before we do summarize from today and tell you what's next, let me ask Justin, Jared, Linda, Zoe, is there anything you wanted to update the group on regarding activities, regarding resources, anything else you would like to update the group on as related to modeling and going forward?
I don't know that I've got much else to add. Just know that the model is we've got it humming at all hours of the day and night. So we'll try to be as responsive as we can as providing results when we get them. So in the next office hours, if we've got some good results to share, we'll be more than happy to do that as well. But also look forward to to getting some communications back on some alternatives or clarifications or thoughts about other modeling activities. Appreciate it. And thanks again, Margie and Kathy and everybody and Deborah to facilitating this for us. It's very smooth when you guys are leading us the way through here. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Justin. It's a team effort. So appreciate all the work that your team is doing. Deb, could you move to slide number 16, please? Let me just let people know what's happening next. We're going to leave the the chat open for a bit in case you are interested in putting topics for the next session in the chat. We will distribute a written summary and the recording will be available on the GridWorks website. We've already talked about the data request forms and instructions. Those are listed on the GridWorks website under workshop number 3, and that link has also been shared on these slides. The SPS slide deck from today has also been loaded on our website. It was loaded early this morning, so if you want to look at charts there, you'll find those available under workshop number 4 materials. Our next workshop will be hosted in Hobbs, New Mexico with Zoom participation available. We want to encourage anybody who can to attend in person for opportunities for full engagement. We know the Zoom can be what's available for those who can't travel, and it's very helpful to be able to sit around a table and have conversations face to face. So we want to encourage in-person attendance. Our plan is to focus on modeling results to date and continue to refine the stakeholder requested model runs. We're going to plan for 2 half-day sessions, the afternoon of June 23rd and the morning of June 24th. These are Mountain Daylight Time times in Hobbs, New Mexico at the SPS Excel Service Center there in Hobbs. We'll give you more details about that. And again, we want to encourage attendance in person. Did not put on this slide, I apologize, the link to the model run request form, but I think we will work with SPS on updating the schedule for that and perhaps load a new version of that form along with a deadline so that you know when the due date is for that. With that, let me ask first Kathy and Deb if there's anything you would like to add for today, and then we'll go to the SPS team for any final comments. Kathy, anything on Deb that we need to do at this point?
No, just that this afternoon I will send out a calendar invite for the next workshop in Hobbs, New Mexico.
And
Thanks,
Deb
Margie.
can I just add to Deb would be extremely appreciative of having an RSVP when she sends that out about whether you plan to attend in person or via Zoom. It helps us with our logistics planning on site. So please RSVP and tell her whether you plan to attend in person or on Zoom. Sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
No, that's all right. And thank you. I just dropped into the chat again the link to the modeling run request form. And I will add our website as well, where you can find all the slide decks, all the materials that we've generated thus far.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Linda and Jared, Justin, Zoe, any of your team, anything you would like to add before we close today?
The only thing that I would add is just that we appreciate everybody taking the time out of the day. We know these meetings are long, and it can get a little bit wonky at times, but I think it's fantastic to see everybody's willingness to participate in our planning processes. So thank you for your time.
And I'll just add to that, appreciated the Q&A today. Had some really good engagement, some good thoughts and considerations. So appreciate hearing that. A couple items that we'll be following up on and look forward to the next opportunities for us to engage with this group. So appreciate it and look forward to bringing more information to the next discussions.
Great, thanks, Jared. Justin, Linda, anything you'd like to add?
I don't believe so. I guess I will just say that, our slide deck is available. Kathy put the link in the chat, and there is a link to the modeling request form in that PDF.
Great, thank you. And as always, questions to both Deb Shields and Linda Hudgens so that we can keep things moving forward and share information amongst the team. You all as stakeholders are extremely important to this process, and your voices, your considerations, your thoughts really improve the conversation, and ultimately this modeling information will be used to formulate statement of need and action plan. So those who are willing to dig down deep into data, we appreciate and respect your ability to do that. Those who feel like you need to stay at the bigger picture level and want to come back and engage when we go back to the big picture topics, you're welcome to maybe step away for the next couple workshops, but we invite you back in August and September when the results are being digested. So we're diving deep and we will go back to big picture in August, but thank you those who are willing and able to dig deep into modeling. With that, we'll say thank you and give you back 7 minutes of your morning and your day, and we'll see you next in Hobbs in June. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.